Amrita Ghosh Kumar, and our subject expert today is Professor Meena Gupta. Today we shall discuss changes in the relative share of primary, secondary and tertiary sectors in the national income and percentage of labour force engaged in these sectors since independence. Let us first of all look at changes that generally take place in the pattern of sectoral distribution of income and labour with economic development. Historically, it has been observed that economic development is accompanied by industrial development, leading to a decline in the share of primary sector in national income and employment, and increase in the share of secondary sector before it gives way to the tertiary sector, also known as the service sector. When per capita income is low, a substantial portion of it is spent on food and agriculture, therefore accounting for a major share in the gross domestic product and provision of employment. As per capita income increases, pattern of demand changes. The increased income is spent on food and other basic necessities. Gradually, expenses on food declines and demand for manufactured products increases, leading to a higher industrial output. Industrial sector also creates demands for agricultural products that serve as raw materials to industries. Growth of industries leads to more trade and consequently more travel and transportation and the need for professional services. This leads to a decline in the share of agriculture in the GDP and increase in the industry and services. This changes employment pattern as more and more people get employed in the secondary and tertiary sectors. Intersectoral distribution of income and employment changes. Initially, the decline is in the share of agriculture is accompanied by an increase in the share of both industrial and service sectors. As economies reach high levels of development, service sector has emerged as the largest contributor to the national income and employment. In developing countries, the share of the three sectors in the gross domestic product or GDP ranges between 10 to 15% for agriculture, 32 to 47% for industry and 38 to 55% for services. In developed countries, the share of agriculture is 1 to 4% of the national income and employment. Industry accounts for 22 to 30% of the income and between 21 to 33% for employment. Service sector accounts for 68 to 75% of GDP and 63 to 74% of employment. When India got independence, its economy was primarily agricultural. Per capita income at 1948 to 49 prices was rupees 247.5 per annum. Per capita income of those deriving their income from agriculture was rupees 150 to rupees 200 per annum, reflecting low agriculture productivity. Primary sector, which mainly comprised of agriculture, contributed about 57% of national income. Secondary sector, whose main component was manufacturing sector, contributed nearly 16%. Industries mainly comprised of cotton and jute textiles and iron and steel. Agriculture-based industries such as cotton and jute textiles, sugar, vegetable oils, wheat flour, rice milling, paper and paper products accounted for more than 71% of the total value added by industries. Iron and steel accounted for 7.6% of value added and engineering 5.4%. Contribution of tertiary sector was about 26.5%, out of which trade, transport and communication contributed nearly 18%. changes in the sectoral distribution of income in India are not totally in line with structural changes historically observed as economies transform from an underdeveloped to a developed economy. Till 1971, the share of primary sector in net domestic product declined merely to 46.5% as industry and trade recorded a slow growth rate. In the following 4 decades, despite increase in volume of agriculture production, share of primary sector in national income declined sharply to 15% by 2009-2010. Share of secondary sector, which had increased from 16% in 1951 to 28% by 1991, declined to 25% by 2009-2010. The falling shares have been captured by tertiary sector, whose share increased from 26.5% in 1951 to 40% in 1991 and to 60% in 2009 to 2010. Share of agriculture sector as percentage of GDP at factor cost at 2004 to 2005 prices declined to less than 14% by 2012 to 2013, while that of secondary sector increased to 27% and of service sector to 59%. In economically advanced countries, share of agriculture in GDP stands at 2 to 3%. In USA, Canada, Australia, it is 2 to 3%. In UK, France and Germany, it is 1 to 2%. In India, it is estimated at 14% of GDP in 2012-2013. Within the primary sector, there is a shift in GDP from agriculture to other spheres such as livestock, fisheries and poultry. This is the result of an increase in income and consequent changes in the pattern of food consumption. With an increase in income, demand for dairy products, meat, fish, eggs and so on has increased, and with that the proportion of these items in the GDP has shown an increase. Since fisheries continue to be primarily in the small scale sector, it is a source of not only income but also employment in rural areas. This led to an increase in income in the rural areas. Contribution of forestry to the GDP of primary sector has, however, declined, which is the result of deforestation caused by growing demand for land for industrial and residential use. Secondary sector comprises of manufacturing, construction, electricity, gas and water supply. During the first 3 decades, declining share of agriculture was mainly captured by the industrial sector. The following decade saw an increase in the share of secondary as well as the tertiary sector. By 1991, the share of secondary sector in NDP had increased to 28% from 16.3% in 1951. Manufacturing is the main constituent of this sector. Development of capital goods industries after second 5-year plan was mainly responsible for increasing contribution of secondary sector to economic growth. These included iron and steel, fertilizers, chemicals, machine tools, electrical equipments, petroleum products, railway engines and so on. The share of secondary sector declined after 1990 to 24.9% of NDP by 2009 to 2010, mainly due to growth of the service sector. Share of manufacturing sector in the net domestic product declined after 1991 to 13.5% by 2009 to 2010. It is estimated to be 15.1% of GDP in 2012 to 2013. Growth of modern industries has undermined the importance of the unorganized small-scale sector, which lost considerably after liberalization. The construction sector has grown over the years from 3.5% of NDP during the 1950s to 8.4% of the NDP in 2009 to 2010. It is estimated to be 7.9% of the GDP in 2012 to 2013. Share of electricity, gas and water supply continues to be small at 1.2% of NDP in 2009 to 2010 and 1.9% of GDP in 2012 to 2013. Mining and quarrying has increased its share marginally from 1.4 to 1.8 of NDP 2009 to 2010, as is about 2% of the GDP in 2012-2013. Services grew at a rate of 4.6% during the first 3 decades, but their growth accelerated to 6.5% during 1980 to 1995 and was more than 8.5% thereafter and is nearly 10% today. Trade, transport and communication constitute about half of the tertiary sector, their share being 28 out of 60% of NDP in 2009 to 2010 and approximately 27.5% of the GDP in 2012 to 2013. Within this group, share of trade, hotels and restaurants increased from 8.8% in 1951 to nearly 18% of the GDP by 2009-2010. Trade is the largest segment, accounting for nearly 16%. Growth in transport and communication has been much larger, from 1.8 to 10.3, contributed to a large extent by development of communication technology after 1990 and more so after 2005 and 2006. The growth of communication services has been 17% per annum during the 90s and has touched 26.7% per annum during 2005-2006 to 2009-2010. This is the result of fast growth of the telecom sector. Financial and insurance sector also witnessed a growth from 1.2 to 8.8 and real estate from 6.1 to 9.1% of the NDP during this period. Share of financial insurance, business and real estate service is estimated to be 18.7% of the GDP in 2012 and 2013. The fastest growing segment is business services with an annual growth rate of nearly 20% since 1990. Credit for this growth sector goes to the IT sector. An important factor is high income elasticity of demand for services, which is more than unity. Demand for services has increased with increase in per capita income. Increase in income levels has led to an increase in demand for consumer services with high income elasticity of demands such as hotels, restaurants, telephones and so on. Growth in the per capita income has also caused and led to higher demand for education and health. Development of communication, free commodity flows and movement of people have produced a demonstration effect and has led to a shift in the pattern of demand for services in line with that of developed countries. Growth in manufacturing sector, although very slow, has also contributed to an increase in the demand for producer services. Producer services comprise of trade, transport, storage, telecommunication, financing, real estate, the services which are complementary in nature and whose growth is linked to growth of the manufacturing sector. High income elasticity of demand for producer services has led to emergence and expansion of new services such as the advertisement, publicity, marketing as their demand increases with industrialization. All this has great expansionary potential as 50% of industries are directly or indirectly service intensive. An important contributing factor in the growth of tertiary sector in India has been technological advances and India's supremacy in information technology. Information technology and services related to it have shown a tremendous increase during the last 15 years, increasing from $1.1 billion in 1995-96 to $100.8 billion in 2011 to 2012. Contribution of IT or ITES to GDP has increased 1.2% in 97-98 to 7.5% in 2011-2012. 70% of this is exported. Outsourcing of IT services to India due to cost advantage has led to high increase in export of IT services and export of services related to IT such as travel, insurance, financial services, besides software services and information technology related services such as education and medical. Development of technology also resulted in spectacular increase in communication. Development of roadways, railways, shipping and civil aviation contributed to an increase in transport. Liberalization of the economy involving reduction in tariffs, removal of export and exchange controls have led to an enormous increase in trade, especially exports and imports. The financial sector, banking, insurance and other financial services also grew with some foreign participation in these sectors. Developed countries witnessed growth of industrial sector leading to growth of service sector. In India, before liberalization, the growth rate of industrial sector was more than that of the service sector and was responsible for the growth of the service sector. However, after liberalization, India witnessed high growth of the service sector before manufacturing could emerge as an important sector. The share of service sector has surpassed that of industrial sector even in the first stage of economic development. According to many economists, this sector has played an important role in economic development. According to RBI, service sector has provided an element of stability to the growth process. It compensates for lack of development of agriculture and industry. This is likely to give further momentum to the economy as education, health and other services expand. Export of services is another area for future growth. Global BPO or the business process outsourcing market is quite large and provides scope for larger increase. Many economists have, however, expressed doubt about the sustainability of growth with transition to a service economy without passing through a process of industrialization. Major problem is lack of generation of employment by the service sector. Agriculture is labor intensive with low productivity. Service sector is capital intensive with high productivity. While it is feasible to move significant number of workers from agriculture into well-paid jobs and formal manufacturing activities, it is not feasible to move them to formal services sector as they have low employment intensity. Unless industries develop and absorb labor, occupational structure would continue to be tilted in the favor of agriculture and per capita income cannot increase. Eminent economist Shankar Acharya is of the view that services are highly important, but they cannot by themselves assure rapid and sustained growth of the Indian economy. In underdeveloped countries, 70 to 90% of the population is engaged in agriculture. As economy develops, there is a shift from agriculture to industry and then to the service sector. Many factors account for this shift in occupational structure. As noted in the beginning, with an increase in per capita income, demand for non-agricultural products increases. This causes production in the industrial sector to increase and more workers find jobs in this sector. Development leads to an increase in agriculture productivity, and therefore demand for workers in agriculture does not increase in the same proportion as an increase in population. With the development of the industry, it attracts labor with higher income possibilities. Development of industry leads to the growth of trade and transport, which in turn leads to an increase in labor force in the tertiary sector. Proportion of labor engaged in the primary sector declines as workers move on to the secondary and the tertiary sectors. As economies reach high levels of development, there is a shift in population from secondary to tertiary sector, and percentage of workers engaged in tertiary sector overtake those in the secondary sector. Occupational structure in India in 1951 typically resembled that of an underdeveloped economy, with 72.3% of total workforce engaged in agriculture and allied activities. Agriculture productivity was low, requiring large numbers of people to work in primary sector. Industries were almost non-existent and provided employment to merely 10.7% of the population. Service sector was non-existent. As India proceeded on the path of industrial development, occupational structure witnessed some changes, but these were not significant enough. Despite decreasing importance of primary sector in the national income, there was hardly any change in the occupational distribution until 1971. The proportion of workers in primary sector continued to be nearly 72% of the workforce. By 1991, there was some decline in the percentage of labor in agriculture, but the pace was slow. The process of industrialization failed to absorb surplus labor from agriculture. Service sector also failed to provide employment on a large scale. Share of this sector in employment increased by merely 15%, despite a huge increase in its share in the GDP. Slow increase in productivity in agriculture and inadequate development of non-agricultural sector as compared to an increase in population has led to still over 55% of people dependent on agriculture, despite its share in GDP coming down to 14%. Employment in industrial sector is 21.5%. Contribution of the service sector is low at 25% despite a high growth of this sector. There is generally a high degree of symmetry between the share of GDP and employment in different sectors. Historical data reveals the same pattern of distribution of national income and employment in developed countries. In developed countries, the share of agriculture in GDP is 1 to 2%, and in employment it is 1.2 to 4%. For the industrial sector, it ranges from 19 to 28% in GDP and 17 to 29% in employment. For services sector, it is 71 to 79 for GDP and 69 to 81% in employment. Thus, changes in the structure of labor force followed the same pattern as changes in the structure of output. This, however, is not true of India. Shift in occupational distribution has not followed a similar trend as shift in distribution of GDP. When share of primary sector in national income was 57% in 1951, this sector accounted for 72.1% of the total workforce. By 1991, the share of primary sector in national income declined to 33%, and there was no corresponding shift in the distribution of workforce in this sector. It declined much less and stood at 67%. Share of labor force in industrial sector is 22.4% with 26% of contribution to the national income. Despite substantial increase in the share of services accounting for 66% of the GDP, its share in providing employment is only 25%. During the 90s, the share of services in GDP increased, share of services in employment declined. Much employment could not be generated in this sector as technology became increasingly capital intensive and capital is being used more efficiently by skilled labor. Both secondary and tertiary sectors have thus failed to provide jobs to the increasing population with an increase in GDP. Industrial and service sectors have witnessed a jobless growth. It is evident that with economic development, sectoral distribution of GDP and employment has not followed similar patterns in India. While sectoral distribution of national income points to a developed economy, occupational distribution does not corroborate this. Before we wind up, let us now sum up some of the major findings. With economic development, the share of agriculture in national income has declined substantially, though it is still much larger than in developed countries. Initially, decline in share of agriculture was accompanied by an increase in the share of both secondary and tertiary sectors. After 1991, service sector witnessed the tremendous growth and its share in the national income surpassed that of the industrial sector. India has thus witnessed service-led growth. Whether this service-led growth is sustainable or not is highly debatable. Changes in occupational structure have not been in line with changes in sectoral distribution of the national income. While sectoral distribution of national income points to a developed economy, occupational distribution, however, shows India continues to be an underdeveloped economy. That's all for today. Thank you and goodbye.